Our next measuring tool, the dial indicator, can be seen as a general-purpose version of the dial bore gauge. The indicator's spring-loaded plunger, or spindle, is set so its point contacts the item to be measured. When the item is moved, the resulting needle rotation indicates runout, end play, or clearance. Many dial indicators have graduations of 1/1000th of an inch. So, with 100 graduations, one revolution of the needle represents 1/10 of an inch. The total range of the dial indicator depends on the length of the plunger and the graduations used. One useful feature of dial indicators is a rotating dial, so that the zero can be positioned under the needle no matter what the needle's position. This is known as zeroing the reading. Dial indicators require either stands or clamps so they can be positioned to take measurements. Let's look at using the dial indicator for measurement, beginning with checks of crankshaft and camshaft runout. You can measure crankshaft runout with the crankshaft out of the engine and supported by V-blocks. You can also check the crankshaft for runout while it is in the engine and supported by the end-bearing journals. Position the dial indicator's point perpendicular to the surface of the journal to be checked, and zero the dial. Then rotate the crankshaft while observing the needle. Keep in mind that if a journal is out of round, it will affect the readings. As a general rule, after taking out of round into account, runout should not exceed 1/1000th of an inch between journals and 2/1000ths of an inch overall. Excessive readings indicate a bent crankshaft that must be replaced. Using a dial indicator and V-blocks, you can check camshaft journals in the same way. Maximum allowable runout generally runs from 2 to 5/1000ths. End play is another check you may need to make on the crankshaft and camshaft, and you can use a dial indicator to make this check as well. For crankshaft end play, mount the dial indicator on the front of the engine, with the point resting against the end of the crankshaft. Next, move the crankshaft all the way to the rear of its travel, and zero the dial indicator. At this point, moving the crankshaft forward reveals the amount of end play. Compare the reading obtained with the specifications in the service manual. End play which is excessive indicates either a worn thrust bearing or a damaged or worn crankshaft. Measurement of camshaft end play is similar to that for the crankshaft. Mount the dial indicator so that its point rests against the end of the camshaft. The way in which you check camshaft end play may vary from engine to engine, so be sure to see the appropriate service manual for details. Also, specifications for end play may vary depending on whether you use old or new parts, so be sure to use the procedure for the engine you're working on. Let's look at one more use for the dial indicator, measuring valve stem to guide clearance. For this check, valves are removed from the cylinder head and then inserted to a specified depth in the valve guide. The valve is held in position either with a special tool or with a spacer fabricated for this purpose. The dial indicator is set up so its point is against the outside edge of the valve at a right angle to the valve stem. At this point, you can read stem to guide clearance by moving the valve toward and away from the dial indicator. By comparing the result to the specifications in the service manual, you can determine whether the guide and valve need to be serviced.